Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper, beginning with a news item on page number 1 of the Delhi edition of The Hindu. India will protect every inch of its territory, says Prime Minister Modi. This is in continuation to the discussion we have had yesterday. In yesterday's newspaper analysis, we had a detailed analysis of the current standoff between India and China on the line of actual control. We discussed the possible reasons for this aggressive behavior by the Chinese side, and we also looked at a solution. So when we discussed the solution and the way forward, we looked at the role of diplomacy. Diplomacy should be allowed to trump because it is only through talks and through peaceful negotiations that differences between the two countries can be ironed out. And yesterday, the foreign minister, Mr. S. J. Shankar, spoke with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi, and both the sides have decided to ease the tension and de-escalate. Although the talks at the military level, according to the newspaper reports, have been proven inconclusive, but there is a hope that there is some diplomatic resolution of this current standoff. Prime Minister Modi also spoke and he said India is not someone who will provoke another nation, but we will also not compromise with the integrity and sovereignty of our country. And whenever it is needed, our armed forces have the capability, have the strength in protecting and defending this sovereignty of country. And India wants peace, but if India is provoked, India is going to give a befitting reply to those who want to violate the territorial sanctity of the nation. Today's newspaper is flooded with the articles related to this Indo-China standoff, but we will only look at those articles which are relevant from the examination point of view. If you look at a newspaper article on page number 14, written by Stanley Johnny, it talks about and it raises a very important question: is China's so-called peaceful development over? Because although we have been focusing on the Chinese incursions into line of actual control, but let's look at other Chinese misadventures in the recent days or in the recent past. Number one, Chinese fighter jets. They have entered Taiwan. They entered the Taiwan airspace. This has happened thrice in a week. China has made it clear that reunification of Taiwan with the People's Republic of China is our goal. Second thing that has happened, 2 months ago, Chinese ships, they entered the waters of Malaysia and Vietnam. Third thing, China has repeatedly claimed the South China Sea, and it is here that China is repeatedly poking Japan. All these are pointers to a new aggressive foreign policy of China. On top of it, the relations between United States and China, they are real bad. Australia Australia recently asked for investigation into the COVID-19 outbreak. And instead, what China did, China imposed curbs on travel to Australia. China yesterday also warned the students of China not to return to Australia to study. This will impact Australian universities. Look at Hong Kong, for example. Until 1997, Hong Kong was ruled by Britain as her colony, but then it was returned to China. For Hong Kong, China follows a policy, a structure called one country, two systems. This arrangement, one country, two systems, would mean that although, according to China, Hong Kong is part of China, but Hong Kong has some autonomy. The people there have more rights compared to those enjoyed by the Chinese citizens in China. But then there was a controversy over a bill. This is what we call extradition bill. This extradition bill would have allowed critics of China in Hong Kong to be extradited to mainland China. And if they are extradited to mainland China, this is where obviously they will be subjected to unfair trial. They will be subjected to violent treatment. And there were huge protests in Hong Kong, and ultimately China used brute force to crush this uprising. Later on, this bill was subsequently withdrawn. But all this is pointing out to something very dangerous, that China is now becoming even more aggressive. China is committing misadventures after misadventures, and it is trying to expand its territorial claims. Not just expand its territorial claims, but also provoke other nations. And China does not shy away from using force in addressing the challenges. So, if you look at the predecessor of Xi Jinping, the current president of the People's Republic of China, predecessor was Hu Jintao. Hu Jintao had adopted a policy of peaceful rise. That means we will rise in the comity of the world nations, but we are not going to rise by provoking other nations, but we will peacefully rise, which is our due, which is our right. This term, peaceful rise, was later on changed into peaceful development. But looking at what is happening on line of actual control with India, looking at what is happening with Japan on South China Sea, how China has violated the airspace of Taiwan, how China is in confrontation with Malaysia and Vietnam, the relations with United States as well as Australia, all this point out to one interesting thing, which is that China's so-called peaceful development is over. It is no longer shying away from using force to realize its ambitions. That's number one. If you look at the editorials in today's The Hindu newspaper, here is this editorial which talks about the disorder at the border. And here the editorial gives some suggestions. Suggestion number one: first, the government should apprise the nation and tell the nation exactly what happened in late April along the line of actual control, including the clashes that we have seen near Sikkim as well. So the editorial suggests that there has to be some clarity. The nation needs to be told what exactly happened along the line of actual control. This editorial also says that one speculation has been put to rest, because there were newspaper reports which said that China has not crossed over line of actual control. The sanctity of line of actual control has not been breached. But these clashes, the unfortunate killings of 20 soldiers of Indian Army, it proves beyond any reasonable doubt that Chinese have entered the Indian territory. This editorial has another suggestion, that if we want to pay a glowing tribute to those who lost their lives, then for that, what we have to do, we have to ensure accountability from Beijing. And this accountability should include that Beijing should withdraw, China should withdraw from all the territories that it has illegally occupied in the last few weeks. Although both the Ministry of External Affairs and the Chinese Foreign Ministry, they have reaffirmed their commitment to dialogue, because dialogue is the way through which the peace can be restored. But this editorial suggests that both the sides should also acknowledge that the situation is very, very dangerous. And what has happened in the recent weeks or recent days, it has undone all the significant gains that we had reached on the LAC question. And on top of that, this editorial suggests that there has to be a status quo ante, which basically means that what was the situation of LAC prior to these incursions, that status must be restored. So if Galwan River Valley is an area which is a legitimate Indian territory, where there was no real dispute between India and China, and now for the first time in many decades, China is claiming sovereignty over Galwan River Valley, we have to restore the status quo ante, which means prior to these incursions, what was the status of LAC? That should be restored. That means the Chinese side, if they are still present in the Galwan River Valley, they have to withdraw. But then there is a very interesting article written by Suhasini Haider on the history, the current standoff, and the policy that we have been following with respect to China and the neighboring countries. For that, if we look at Mao or Mao Zedong or Mao Zedong, no matter how you pronounce it, who is considered to be the tallest Chinese leader of all time, during Mao's time and subsequently later as well, there was a strategy that China was following. According to this strategy, Tibet is the right palm of China, and then there are 5 fingers to this palm. Which are these 5 fingers? One is Ladakh, the other is Sikkim, then we have Nepal, then Bhutan, and then Nepal or Northeast Frontier Agency, which is now what we call as the Arunachal Pradesh. And according to this strategy, these five fingers are to be liberated. And if you look at these five fingers, it is here that Indian diplomacy has trumped the Chinese. In the year 1954, when Panchsheel Agreement was signed between India and China, wherein both the sides reaffirmed peaceful coexistence. But after this 1954 Panchsheel Agreement, Pandit Nehru's government, they had begun to worry about some of these Chinese proclamations even before the 1962 war. Because on one hand, you are talking about peaceful coexistence with India, but on the other hand, you are talking about liberation of these five fingers. It doesn't go hand in hand. If you look at Tibet, China has forcibly annexed Tibet, despite the fact that they have been claiming that there are historical ties between Tibet and China. That is why Tibet is a legitimate part and parcel of China. But when the Tibetans were persecuted, lakhs of these Tibetans, they left Tibet and came to India. And in 1959, the 14th Dalai Lama, the current Dalai Lama, was given refugee status in India along with lakhs of his followers. And it was around the same time that China for the first time began to talk about self-determination in Kashmir. It is argued that Chinese press and radio, they launched propaganda war on India. Some Nagas, some Mizos who were disenchanted with India, they were provided entry into China and they were given training in arms and ammunition. And it was around the same time that the school textbooks in China, they began to refer these five fingers as the part of Beijing, as the part of China. But after the unfortunate loss to China in the 1962 war, it is important to understand the effective diplomacy employed by India against this Mao's five-finger policy. The first policy, managing the borders. Second, outreach and treaties. And third, the Tibetan issue as well as on Jammu and Kashmir. If you look at these five areas, the first and the foremost priority of the government, the then government, was that how should we build infrastructure, roads, installations, so that we can give development to these areas and ultimately we can counter the Chinese influence as well. In the 1950s, IFAS was constituted, Indian Frontier Administrative Services. The Foreign Secretary of India was the head of the selection panel who would select these IFAS officers, because these IFAS officers would basically be IFS officers, IAS officers, IPS officers, but then they had the responsibility of ensuring development in these border areas. This was primarily viewed as a counter to the five-finger policy employed by Mao. But this IFAS, it was junked in 1968, and the roles and responsibilities of IFAS were transferred to Indian Army and Border Roads Organization, BRO. And if you look at the developments made by Indian Army and Border Roads Organization in the recent past, we have constructed good level of infrastructure along these border areas. But Suhasini Heather says it is time to revisit IFAS because there are people in the Northeast who still complain that because of the distance from the center to the Northeast, their grievances are not getting assuaged. And for this reason also, in 2019, the chief ministers of Arunachal Pradesh as well as Mizoram, they called for the restoration or resurrection of IFAS. The second policy that was employed by the government to deal with this five-finger policy of Mao was outreach and treaties. Ladakh became part of India when Jammu and Kashmir acceded to the Union of India in 1947. But specifically important is to understand Sikkim. In the year 1950, the Sikkim monarchy, they entered into an agreement with the government of India, and because of which Sikkim became a protectorate of India. What do we mean by protectorate? In international law, a protectorate is a country which is weaker, but it is protected by a stronger country such as India. That means on diplomatic front, on military front, if there is any attack on Sikkim, India will protect Sikkim against any assault on Sikkim, whether it is diplomatic assault or military assault. And this is how Sikkim became a protectorate of India. But slowly and steadily, there was a movement in Sikkim, which is what we call the spring of 1973. There was a series of protests in Sikkim, wherein people in Sikkim, they wanted to overthrow the monarchy because Sikkim was ruled by a monarch, and this institution of monarchy was called Chogyal. So people were fed up of Chogyal and they wanted this institution to be abolished. And people, they also wanted good relations with India. Some of them also wanted that they should become full-fledged part of the territory of India. There are reports which say that these protests were organized or given support by RAW, which is the Research and Analysis Wing, which is the external intelligence agency of the government of India. And ultimately, there was some agreement. Agreement between the protesters, agreement between India and the Chogyal. Because of this, what happened? Elections were conducted in Sikkim. When elections were conducted in Sikkim, a pro-New Delhi, a pro-India political party, Sikkimese Congress, won the election. And when they won the election, they entered into the Parliament of Sikkim or legislature of Sikkim and they passed a law. The law was called Government of Sikkim Act of 1974. According to this act, what happened? Chogyal was reduced to a ceremonial post. That means his position became similar to the Queen of England. That means prior to 1974, Chogyal had all the powers. Chogyal had all the influence over Sikkim. And now because of these elections, where a pro-India political party, Sikkimese Congress, won the election, ultimately what happened? The parliament passed a law because of which Chogyal was reduced to a ceremonial post. This is where Chogyal became very impatient and he complained to almost every power that there be, complaining against the India and how India is interfering in the internal politics of Sikkim. And it was in this backdrop that Article 2 capital A was added to the Constitution of India and Sikkim was admitted as an associate state of India. But within a year later, the Sikkimese parliament, what it did, it abolished the institution of monarchy altogether. And then there was a referendum in Sikkim. Overwhelmingly, more than 99% population in Sikkim voted for complete integration with India. And it is then Sikkim became a full-fledged part of the territory of India. Obviously, China did not recognize it. But as recent as 2003, then again in 2005, China made a statement that Sikkim is not a matter of dispute between India and China. So one of the five fingers, Ladakh, was tackled because Ladakh, which is part of Jammu and Kashmir, which was part of Jammu and Kashmir state, it got integrated with the Union of India in 1947. What about Sikkim? Sikkim became a full-fledged part of India in 1975. What about Bhutan and Nepal? The government of India dealt with these two countries through outreaches and through treaties. If you look at your civil services examination, a citizen from Nepal, Bhutan, also Tibet, they can apply for this examination. They can be appointed as IAS officers or IPS officers. It was through this friendship treaty with Bhutan and Nepal that we strengthened the relationship between the two countries. But now begs a question. Why is it that Nepal is also angry right now? Because of the reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir, when the new map was released by the government of India, Nepal objected, saying that Kalapani and few other areas, they are the legitimate territories of Nepal. Why have you included them in your territories? And today itself, a constitutional amendment bill has been cleared by the Nepal parliament, which have included Indian territories as part of Nepal. The Indian Army chief says Nepal is doing this at the behest of China. So why is it that till recently, if we had good relations with Nepal, but the relationship is getting soured? And why is it that China is not in a position to make similar inroads into Bhutan? Why is it that Nepal has come under the influence of China and not Bhutan? According to Suhasini Haider, it is because that the friendship treaty that was signed between India and Bhutan, it was renegotiated as well. This treaty, which was originally signed in 1949, was renegotiated in 2007. Because till 2007, India could have guided the foreign policy of Bhutan as well. And the biggest testimony of that is the Doklam crisis of 2017. So this Doklam, which is a tri-junction, it is not claimed by India. In fact, India claims that it is the territory of our ally Bhutan. That is why when Chinese entered the border, crossed over to this Doklam area and started constructing roads and other installations, India crossed the border and confronted the Chinese army, which resulted in a standoff at Doklam between India and China. This standoff was resolved only when China decided to stop all the construction activities, which basically means this friendship treaty with Bhutan in 1949, renegotiated in 2007, it is testimony to the fact that we still have good relations with Bhutan. But why not with Nepal? Because this friendship treaty with Nepal, which was signed in 1950, Nepal is clearly asking for a long time now that let's renegotiate this friendship treaty. Because if Indians are allowed to enter Nepal, Nepal citizens are allowed to enter India without any visa. They can buy property, they can apply for government jobs in India. But the Nepali citizens believe that if Indians are allowed to buy land in Nepal, conduct business activities in Nepal, it is prejudicial to the Nepali citizens. So this friendship treaty is tilted in favor of India and is against Nepal. That is what the critics in Nepal say. So we still have not renegotiated this treaty, and that is why China is in a position to make inroads into Nepal but not in Bhutan. If you look at the Tibet issue, Buddhism believes in reincarnation. So the 14th Dalai Lama that we have, now we have to search for 15th Dalai Lama, because now 14th Dalai Lama will be reincarnated. The current Dalai Lama has said that maybe it is time to abolish this institution of Dalai Lama because this institution has feudal character, according to Dalai Lama. But he still says that if people in Tibet want, this institution can continue. But where will the new Dalai Lama be found? The current Dalai Lama says, since I am in India, since I am outside Tibet, which basically means the next Dalai Lama should be found outside Tibet. But who is going to be the next Dalai Lama? For that, there have to be signs. These signs are to be interpreted, which means the Tibetan religious leaders in Tibet and the government in Tibet will have a say ultimately who is going to be the next Dalai Lama, which according to critics, China will force its own nominee on the Tibetan people. And in this entire process, since the 14th Dalai Lama is in India, according to Suhasini Haider, India must chart a more prominent role in this entire discourse. Finally, on Jammu and Kashmir, Suhasini Haider writes, it is necessary to introspect as to how India's own reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir in 2019 has changed the security metrics and threat parameters for India and its neighbors. She writes, when India revoked the special status of Jammu and Kashmir and downgraded the state and converted the state into two union territories, the reaction of Pakistan was expected, that Pakistan will react the way it did. But the reaction of China was not perhaps studied enough. China issued a very strong statement at that time that India has unilaterally changed its domestic law, and through this change in the domestic law, it has undermined the sovereignty of China over the Chinese territory. Home Minister of India, Mr. Amit Shah, he also vowed in the parliament that we are going to take Pakistan occupied Kashmir back, as well as Aksai Chin. Suhasini Haider writes that this speech was also not taken lightly by the China. So if right now there is a clash on the line of actual control between India and China, how we should react to the situation, for that we should go back to history, because history offers important lessons into that. Now let's look at another column, maternal health matters. Let's look at the impact of COVID-19 on pregnant women. Number one, a 20-year-old in Telangana suffering from anemia and high blood pressure. She died. Why? She was turned away by 6 hospitals. Case number 2. A 25-year-old woman in Delhi. She was a resident of an area which was declared as a containment zone. She was in labor but was turned away by at least 6 hospitals. Ultimately, she delivered outside All India Institute of Medical Sciences. Earlier this month, a pregnant woman died in an ambulance in Noida. She was denied admission by a number of private and government run hospitals. The writer here asks, when the lockdown was announced, did the government plan for the millions of women who were due for childbirth? We have a lot of schemes for pregnant women and lactating mothers. If a pregnant woman delivers at a hospital, cash benefit is provided to her. Free checkup is conducted on her at least once in every 3 months. There are schemes such as Janani Suraksha Yojana. This scheme has a very important objective of ensuring that women deliver at hospitals because that is how we can reduce the infant mortality rate. But this writer says during the lockdown, the state appears to have forgotten the pregnant women. Despite the fact that these pregnant women, they have been identified as high risk. That means they are at the high risk of contacting COVID-19. We have focused more on COVID-19 pandemic. The hospitals are overburdened, according to the writer. Most of the hospitals are either designated as COVID-19 facilities or these hospitals are not equipped with enough PPE kits, which basically means that we are putting these pregnant women at a higher risk. But then, according to the writer, the government woke up and issued a guideline. According to this guideline, a pregnant woman has to get herself tested for COVID-19, and if she is declared COVID negative, then she can be admitted to a general hospital. But this writer argues, what if a woman is in labor? Time is very less. Test report will take at least 24 hours. In this situation, what will happen? There are no guidelines for that. So we have neglected pregnant women during this COVID-19 pandemic. But the fundamental question is this. Here is a state. What the state is trying to do? It is trying to provide cash transfer or cash benefit to those who will go to a hospital and deliver the child in a hospital rather than at home. So what we are trying to do, the state is here trying to change the behavior of people through these cash transfers. That means the behavior of the people was that we will deliver the child at our own house and we will employ midwives who may not be trained enough. That is why infant mortality rate is high. So to inculcate behavioral change, the state has taken upon itself to change the behavior of the people by providing cash transfers. So if you deliver a child at hospital, whether it's a government or a private hospital, that means we are trying to institutionalize the delivery of children. In that manner, we will provide you cash benefit. So the writer argues, if the state has taken upon itself to change the behavior of the people, is it not also that the onus is now on the state to ensure effective systems for maternal care? In 2011-2013, 167 women would die per 1 lakh childbirths. This rate or maternal mortality ratio, this rate came down to 122 deaths in the year 2017. So we have gained a lot, but the challenges thrown in by COVID-19 pandemic, it has the potential of erasing all the hard-won gains of the last 15 years, that too in one single stroke. So this lockdown period saw the state abdicating its responsibilities towards the welfare of the pregnant women, but it is time to consider doing things differently to improve the maternal health being of a woman, because maternal health matters. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Now let's look at the practice questions, first for prelims and then for mains. Question number 1. Consider the following statements. Aadhaar card can be used as a proof of citizenship or domicile. No, because even a foreigner, someone who has stayed in India for 182 days or more, he is eligible to enroll for Aadhaar. Aadhaar is not a proof of citizenship, it is not a proof of domicile. Once issued, Aadhaar number cannot be deactivated or omitted by issuing authority. No, Unique Identification Authority of India can deactivate an Aadhaar card once it is issued. So both these statements are incorrect. Question number 2. Which of the following has or have shrunk immensely or dried up in the recent past due to human activities? Aral Sea, yes. Lake Baikal, yes, but not the Black Sea. So 1 and 3 are the correct answers. Question number 3. Which of the following statement is or are correct? Bioremediation employs the use of living organisms like microbes and bacteria to remove contaminants, pollutants, and toxins from soil and water. Correct? Bioremediation may be used to clean up environmental problems such as oil spills or contaminated groundwater. Both these statements are correct. Why? What is the context? Because in Assam, there was an oil spill near the Bagjan natural gas well. Ultimately, it caught fire. And now bioremediation of the sludge is being done by a team of TERI, the Energy and Research Institute, and another private agency. Let's look at question number 4. When the alarm of your smartphone rings in the morning, you wake up and tap it to stop the alarm, which causes your geyser to be switched on automatically. The smart mirror in your bathroom shows the day's weather and also indicates the level of water in your overhead tank. After you take some groceries from your refrigerator for making breakfast, it recognizes the shortage of stock in it and places an order for the supply of fresh grocery items. When you step out of your house and lock the door, all lights, fans, geysers, and AC machines get switched off automatically. On your way to office, your car warns you about traffic congestion ahead and suggests an alternative route. And if you're late for a meeting, it sends a message to your office accordingly. In the context of emerging communication technologies, which one of the following term best applies to the above scenario? We're talking about B, Internet of Things. Question number 5. Which of the following are the east flowing rivers that originate in the Western Ghats? Godavari, yes. Krishna, yes. Kaveri, yes. Mahanadi, no. So 1, 2, and 3. A is the correct answer. Practice questions for your mains. Answers should be in less than 200 words. Number 1. Comment on the need to resurrect Indian Frontier Administrative Service for overseeing Arunachal Pradesh and other areas along the Indo-China border. Question number 2. India deserves a permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council High Table. Justify. That is it from our newspaper analysis for today. Thank you for being with us. Have a great day.